Hello out there, and today guys, I am just really geared up and excited to be sharing a knife with you that impresses me on so many levels the way this one does. Because what we have in front of us is the Ruike P841, and I've got to tell you, this knife hits on almost every aspect I look for my EDC to hit on. When it comes to the look of the knife, it's got it. When it comes to the way that it feels in hand, the way that it cuts, the action, everything on this knife is excellent. All of the little details are there, especially the value coming in at 40 bucks for this knife. Really impressed. And that should come as no surprise because my experience with Ruike has been excellent so far. My first Ruike, the Fang, which I reviewed last year, I will link to that down below actually, but that knife was just awesome. It exceeded expectations in almost every way imaginable and ended up being one of my best knives of 2017. And this knife in front of you will definitely be on the top 10 list for 2018. I know it's April, I know there's a lot left to go in the year, but there's no way that this knife does not make that list because it is just that good in my opinion. So what we're going to do today is just the most basic, straightforward knife review that I can, just to tell you about how great it is and tell you about all those little things that make me impressed with just the execution of this very good budget-friendly EDC. And I want to start with something that doesn't matter to a lot of people, but for me it does go a long way, and that is the packaging. A lot of you know that I like to store my knives in their boxes, so a good sturdy box is actually pretty important to me, and this one has it. Ruike ready to make it. Not sure how I feel about the motto, but the box itself is strong and sturdy. And you can see underneath the paperwork there's a cutout, so the knife fits in there perfectly. Yep, so you know, packaging isn't going to be a deal breaker or a deal maker, but it definitely is a good start. But let's get into the things that make this knife special. Starting with this blade, and it comes in at just over 3.5 inches of cutting edge. We have Sandvik 14C28N steel, which I'm really happy about and we'll get back to in a minute. But just moving along with the rest of the dimensions and the size and weight of the knife, you can see this is a knife that is pretty much at the top of my range for how big I would want my EDC to be. 3.5 plus inches of cutting edge, like I said, and the overall length is very comparable to a paramilitary 2. So it does have a bit more cutting edge than a PM2, but like I said, from tip to butt, it is pretty similar. Another good size comparison for this Ruike is the ZT0220, which will be heading home to his owner tomorrow. So had to get it on camera today. A little bit more broad for the ZT, but again, overall length is pretty close to comparable. So this is a larger knife. And one way that it is even larger than it looks right here is in width. It is beefy. So taking a look at this knife next to that ZT again, you can see it is just a thicker knife. And let's bring back that paramilitary 2. Again, just a thick knife. One more size comparison. Here is a mini griptilian, just so you can get a little bit of understanding as to how it is versus a smaller knife. And now talking about the weight, just because it is such a big knife and a thick one, you are going to have an extra ounce here or there. And it comes in at 4.9 ounces. And let's talk for just a quick second about what that number on the scale means. Because for me, unless that number is extremely high or extremely low, I don't really pay much attention to it. I'm more concerned with how the knife feels in hand. You know, in this knife, even though it's 4.9 ounces, which is a little bit heavy, you know, it feels great in the hand. That weight sort of just disappears. And so I'm never going to get too caught up in what the scale says when it comes to an EDC. I know there are plenty of people out there who do, because you might use this knife outdoors, you might use it in a camping capacity, you might be in a situation where you're counting every ounce, or maybe on the other side where you want something at a specific weight, something very heavy because you want a heavy duty knife. I don't know. But for me and for my EDC purposes, that number just doesn't matter unless I can feel it in my hand. And again, 4.9 ounces, whatever, it feels great in the hand, so that's that. But now let's get back to the blade and talk about the first huge home run when it comes to this knife. because the blade is just excellent in almost every capacity. Starting with the steel, the 14C28N Sandvik steel, it's a steel that I have a ton of experience with, and I've always really liked it. You know, it used to be a whole lot more prevalent on the marketplace because Kershaw used this in just about all of their USA-made models for a long time. The Leak and the Blur and the Knockout and a few other knives still have it, but it used to be out there in just a whole lot more models than it is today. And that was with good reason, because it's a good steel. It's a really good mid-grade steel. It holds its edge and just retains a lot better, in my opinion, than 8CR13 MOV and AUS 8. It's not as good as, say, 154CM, but it's easy to maintain, and so it just has that good all-around mid-grade quality to it. And at the $40 price point, forgetting the rest of the really great aspects of this knife, at the $40 price point, a knife with Sandvik steel alone is a pretty good value there. The best thing, though, about the blade is just the overall shape. Looking at this blade shape, I mean, I can't ask for anything more than this. And in a recent video about the Spyderco Positron, I talked about this general shape being my favorite blade shape in all of knives. So when you have a little bit of belly that, you know, finishes up with a defined tip, especially because of like a spine that just plunges down right here, you end up with that nice focused tip that is excellent at penetrating to start a cut. And then it continues to cut really well with that belly, but then just aesthetically, it looks great. So this blade shape, again, don't know what it's called, but it just really works for me. We do have a flat grind on this knife. We also do have a bit of a sharpening choil, so that will work for maintenance and keeping it sharp. Should be relatively easy to do that. There is no jimping. And as we move on back and talk about the scales and the ergos, it really isn't that big of a deal. Not really an issue at all. But if there were a little bit of jimping, I would definitely want it to be like right here on these liners. And then as the knife moves forward, maybe onto the spine right here, a little bit would be excellent. But as we move back and talk about the ergonomics, you'll see probably not that big of a deal because there's so many other good things about this. And that brings me to the G10. The G10 here is another home run. It is excellent. What I like so much about the G10 is the layered aspect of it that provides a ton of grip and traction and a number of just like contact points in order to give you the best grip possible. So looking at it up close, we have this green and black layered G10, and this top layer, there we go, this top layer has like the black poking through the green, so it just gives like a different like set of colors as the light hits it differently. Now, this top layer does have some traction on it. It is like medium to fine traction, you know, not really anything too heavy, but it certainly is grippy enough to give you, you know, a good comfortable feel. But then also as the knife comes down to the side of the scales, you have these different layers and these lines where the different layers start, and they're not sharp at all, but they do provide, like I said, more points of contact so that any place that you're holding onto the scale, you're getting a very good grip. And it's just impressive in that way that it's very attractive, but very, very functional as well. So the G10 really, in my mind, couldn't be much better than it is. Now, the other ergos, as you can see, there is no jimping, so you know the most comfortable point to have your thumb is probably right here. But then if you are choking up and using it, there is a shallow depression here where you can choke up, and that's very comfortable as well. So 1, 2, those are really just the main grip configurations that you're going to have since there's no forward choil, but it's comfortable in both of those capacities, and yeah, it works just great. As we move on back, you can see that we do have a pretty solid backspacer, a little bit of openness to get in there, and the knife is generally thick, so you can get in there with like a cotton swab to get the knife clean. You can see a little bit of milling in there that keeps that weight below 5 ounces. Had that not been there, this would probably be like 5.5 ounces. So good job and a nice little detail there for them to do that. We do have a one position pocket clip. It is right side tip up only, and it's just sort of an okay clip. Not a great clip, but not a bad one. I mean, I think for a knife of this size, this amount of real estate sticking out is okay, but it's not great. But for me, a deep carry clip being, you know, just sort of not a big deal is, yeah, it just is what it is. So yeah, nothing great about the clip, nothing bad, but just moving on. And now that brings us to what I think is the next home run. If we have 3 or 4 home runs with this knife, yeah, that's sort of how I see it. The next home run, which is action and lockup. The action on this knife is pretty close to incredible. We're running on bearings and it is silky, silky smooth. So let's try to see the bearings if we can in here. Well, that's the best shot that we're going to get, but yeah, it's just a very smooth knife. Great to open and close. One thing that I really like that the Fang did not have is these thumb studs. So a manual flipper is great, but anyone, I don't know, anyone who's a fan of them and has experienced a thumb stud opening knife with bearings, it's just awesome. It's just a lot of fun. You don't see it all that often, and it's great. So I love the thumb stud aspect. I love the multiple ways of deployment, especially since it's so smooth going both ways. And then closing the knife, let's try to pick it up. It doesn't fall shut, but I mean, it does drop pretty easily. Pretty darn smooth knife. So just a little bit squeaky, but not a big deal as far as I'm concerned at all. So just a very smooth opening, closing. Lockup is flawless. I mean, no up and down, no left or right. We do have these thick liners, and you can see the lockup right here. So I expect the lockup to be great just because the liners are so strong. Centering here is excellent as well. So just all the little details, all the things I look for, like Ruike is delivering on this. Now, there's 2 minor qualms. One of them is not my qualm, but one that a lot of people might be aware of and might look at, and that's just the detent. The knife is super smooth. It doesn't shake open easily. You know, it's not going to like fall open. But you could, with a lot of force, shake this knife open because the detent is not particularly strong. Now, that said, you know, one of the things that you see in knives with a somewhat weak detent is sometimes it's easy to open them and they don't like open all the way because, you know, it's just weak. But the knife is so smooth that you don't have that issue whatsoever. So I'm not concerned with that at all. Again, especially because the knife doesn't shake out easily, so not a big deal to me. But it is something that is worth noting because I know a lot of people are very interested in hearing about that. Now, the one other thing is the lock safety. You might have seen this up here on top and wondered what it is. It is a secondary locking mechanism. And what this does when we have the knife open is you can manually push this piece forward, and what it does is keeps the liner from disengaging. For me, I've always hated these things. I don't like them. I want the knife to just lock up perfectly with the original locking mechanism. That's it. I don't need a secondary lock. Every time I see a secondary lock on a knife, it makes me worried that the original lock just isn't strong enough. Here, that's not the case, you know, and what I can say to Ruike's credit is that there are a lot of knives out there that have something like this, and it's either automatically engaged or it's a little bit of an eyesore and just a weird thing, and I don't really like a lot of those, and this one at least is a little bit subtle, so not a huge deal, but it is, in my estimation, completely unnecessary, and I would just rather it not be there. Now, that said, Ruike is, I'm guessing, trying to appeal to a whole bunch of different kinds of people with this knife, and maybe there are people out there who are not regular knife users who might not be that familiar with a liner lock and might want that extra bit of protection. I don't know, but it's there. It's not a big deal, but like I said, it's just sort of unnecessary in my estimation. So that really brings us to the end, to the conversation about value. So for $40, guys, I think that this is it's a no-brainer. It's about as good as I can imagine a $40 knife being. You know, there are a lot of other options out there. There are things that people might prefer over this one. The first thing that comes to mind is the steel wheel Modus. And the reason why I bring this knife out there is the first time that I had the Ruike on this channel was for my 2,000 subscriber giveaway. I think that's what it was, right? When we had the choice between the Ruike right here or the steel wheel Modus as the knife that you would get if you won that giveaway. And these two knives come in at exactly the same price point. They were both just under $40. And we have very different materials with the Sandvik versus the D2, G10 versus the FRN. But what I have to say is that I would take the Rake over this Modus every day of the week. It's not even a question. And I like the Modus. The Modus is a good knife. I think that for $40, the Modus is a really good high value knife. And the reputation that it started to develop is well earned. I mean, Steel Will is doing a really good job with $40 knives. You know, they're doing an excellent job. But the Rake's just better. The Rake's just a better knife for me. It's better looking, better traction, better action. It just hits on all of the things that I want it to hit on, and it makes it an absolute massive home run. I can't say that enough. You know, you might see a lot of reviews from me. You'll see a lot of different kind of comparison videos, but there will be very few knives that I will rate higher than this, especially at the $40 price point. And so what I want to hear from you guys is, what do you think? Do you think this knife is worth that money? Is there something that you see in this knife that you don't like, that maybe I either overlooked or I just think is great while you disagree? Let me know down below. Really want to hear your opinion on this one. Really want to hear if this is something that you see the same way as me, or if you have a different opinion on it. All right? So any other questions, comments, complaints, suggestions, as always, let me know down below. But I will talk with you soon. I appreciate you watching, and take care. Have a good one.